Well, we're here for today's breakfast bite once again on Pure 24/7 Radio, and I'm Nathan Thomas, joined once again by Vicki Bryson from Torch Trust. Hi, Vicki, how are you?
Hi, Nathan. Good, thanks. It's good to be back.
It's great to see you again, and I love the thought you brought us last time. What have you got planned for us today, then?
Well, it was inspired by a colleague this time. She was talking to me about the Footprints in the Sand poem, and I thought I'd like to talk about that.
Hmm.
So, hopefully, it's a poem that's quite familiar to people. It was also a song sung by Leona Lewis as well. So, a quick recap of what it is. It's a poem that describes someone who has a dream, and they dream that they're walking along the sand with God. And as they do, scenes from their life flash in front of them. And in each scene, they can see two sets of footprints, one belonging to them and one belonging to God. But as they look back on their life, they notice that in those dark and difficult times, they can only see one set of footprints. And so they say, well, God, why in the most difficult times in my life did you leave me? Why would you do that, God? And God replies, you are precious to me, child. When you see only one set of footprints, that's when I carried you. And as I read this poem again, I was drawn to two different pieces of scripture. The first is the Great Commission at the end of Matthew's Gospel. And it's where Jesus says, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. And I was thinking that for Jesus' followers, their journey up till that point would have been a huge roller coaster, really. And it would have been very legitimate for them to think that Jesus had left them at a time when they desperately needed him. They'd only ever known Jesus in the flesh. So when Jesus dies on a cross, it does seem to the disciples that he's left them. Even though he's tried to explain what was going to happen, the disciples didn't quite understand. And so that sense of, well, we needed you, Jesus, where have you gone? Probably would have been really real. So by the time we get to the very end of Matthew's gospel, we read that the disciples go to the mountain where Jesus tells them to go, and it says they worshipped him, but some doubted. Even those who were stood in the physical presence of Jesus, those who had witnessed his crucifixion and resurrection, still had doubts, which firstly gives me huge reassurance on days where I have doubts, but also really made me think of that part of the poem where they said, where were you, God? Where were you? But it's in this context, in the scripture, that Jesus commissions these disciples to go out and make disciples of all nations. Even in the midst of their doubt and confusion, that's when Jesus commissions them. How amazing is it that Jesus doesn't commission and call us because of our own abilities, but in his grace, he sees all that we can be and calls us in full knowledge of our doubts and our brokenness. And it's also in that place that Jesus makes the promise that he is with them always to the end of the age. That commission and promise, not just for his disciples, but for us too, for all who believe and trust in God. And for the disciples, I guess they would have had to get used to a different way of Jesus being with them after the ascension. But for us, I guess we've never known the physical presence of Jesus on earth. But I know in my life, it feels different, Jesus being with me in different places in different times. I know that the feeling of that experience has really changed depending what's going on in my life. A bit like in the poem, as I've walked, the footprints may have felt slightly different. Sometimes God's love has been so clear. Other days, it's been a choice of choosing to trust that God's promises that he's there, even though it doesn't seem like he is, trusting in that promise. Because Jesus says on good days and bad, when it's easy, when it's hard, I am with you always to the end of the age. Just like in that Footprints poem, God's saying, I was with you when you could feel it, when you couldn't feel me with you. That was when I was carrying you. But that sense of it being hard to feel God with us. So the second piece of scripture I really started thinking about was the lament Psalms. I love the Psalms. They're one of my favorite parts of the Bible, and particularly Psalm 10. The Psalm opens with this cry, a bit like the cry in the poem. In Psalm 10, it says, why, Lord, do you stand far off? Why do you hide yourself in times of trouble? A prayer that I have definitely prayed at different points in my life. And I love the fact that we have a God who is big enough to cope with our doubts as well as our faith, a God who we can ask those questions of, a God who wants us to come as we are, bringing our pain, our sorrow, our questions, as well as our joy. And while the psalm starts with the anguish of the psalmist, they cry out to God and they share their pain. And then you see their journey as they remember that promise of God. And by the middle of Psalm 10, we get to verse 14. But you, God, see the trouble of the afflicted. And by the end, they're saying, the Lord is king forever. You listen to the desire of the afflicted. You encourage them. You listen to their cry. I think these two things I love most about this Footprints poem and the conversation it includes is firstly that sense that it is okay to express our doubt and hurt to God, knowing that he will never chide us. But like in the poem, he'll remind us that we too are his precious children. And the second thing I love, and something that sustained me in my faith a lot recently, is that idea of looking back and seeing the faithfulness of God, which has helped me to continue on my journey. I think when I've had times of trouble where it's felt like God hasn't been there, it's that promise of scripture I've been able to hold on to, reminding me that even if it doesn't feel like it, God is there. And then looking back on my journey, a bit like the guy in the poem, and seeing those footprints walking along the sand, remembering that God has always been with me. And so I can really trust that he will be with me again today. And when the next set of troubles come, that I have a God I can trust because I know scripture and I know his presence with me.
Wow, that's brilliant. Yeah, I love that poem. I've heard it a few times. And
Mm,
that idea that when there's just one set of footprints, we can often assume, well, clearly I must have been on my own at that point. But no, actually, it is not us that holds our relationship with God together. It's he who gives us the strength to continue, which is just brilliant.
absolutely. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Vicky. It's been wonderful to hear from you again. I love this thought, and I hope you have a fantastic day as you continue to pursue God. And I love those psalms, like you say. There's so much in there. It's very raw. It's very real. And for many of us, I think we worry that if we doubt, well, that's bad. But
Yeah.
plenty of people doubted in the Bible, and God helped to get them back on course. It's in those doubts that
Yeah.
God refines us. So it's just fantastic.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Vicky. Wonderful to see you again. Have a fantastic day. I'll catch you later.
Thank you. And you. Bye bye.